renowned environmental engineer, activist, and most importantly, storyteller. From engaging in the first climate litigation or legal action in Latin America to filming environmental documentaries, no one shares a story quite like Yurshell Rodriguez. Discover how storytelling motivates activists and allows us to empathize together. And finally, ask yourself why an activist would intentionally avoid COP28, the recent global climate summit. After attending 3 previous summits, Yurshel has greater insight than nearly anyone, but she also has the confidence to protest what she believes is wrong. Enjoy the episode. Thank you for joining us today, Yurshel. Would you mind talking a little bit about your life and your experiences related specifically to climate, but also in general, as you would like?
Thank you for having me. And yeah, always you have to go back to your roots and understand where your commitment come from or why you have this view in life. So for me, I am part of the Raizal Afro-indigenous communities of the archipelago of San Andres, Old Providence, and St. Catalina. That's in Colombia, in the Caribbean Sea. We are stewards of the third grade coral reef barrier in the world. So that's like one of the major things that as a Rizal we carry in our daily lives is our relationship with the coral reef and the sea, because it provides us our food system, our culture, and a lot of what we are as Rizal community is very entangled with the relationship we have with the sea and the coral reef. So we are very honored to be the guardians of the third greatest coral barrier reef in the world. And that's like one of the main reasons that made me like very conscious about the environment around me and how it's being affected and how we as humans are causing these disasters. And I will quote unquote, I don't want to say we as humans, just like everybody, because we know that's not the case. We know that are certain groups, certain organizations that are responsible for a lot of the carbon dioxide that causing climate change. So yeah, it's something I just want to note there. And continuing to that, growing up in my island made me understand a lot of ways of nature, like looking at the clouds and knowing if it's going to rain, or touching the water and feeling its temperature and know if it's good to go fishing or do activities, or looking at the moon and see if it's good for planting and all that stuff. So you learn that from very small when you live in a remote island. And small as Providence is, we're only 5,000 people that lives in this little island, and we carry our lives like that, entangled with nature. So but moving forward, also having an experience very young, I was 10 years, when we had like one of the first major hurricanes in the island. That was in 2005. The hurricane name was Beta, category 3, and it really leave our island damaged. It threw down houses and stuff like that, but majority of the impact was felt in the coral reefs, because they acted also as a barrier that protect us from the big waves, and a lot of the residue that stayed from the island with the rains and stuff like that. It came to this to the came back to the ocean, to the sea, and a lot of trees and things got stuck in the coral. causing a lot of breakage and really putting the health of the coral reef at risk. So understanding this from so small, like understanding that you have to restore the coral, that you have to plant more mangroves and all of this chain of or not chain, this cycle we have with nature, understanding like everyone needs to be healed, us as human, but also the ecosystem. And I started being part of groups that did beach cleanups, that did mangrove planting. I also was volunteer at the national park. We have this system in Colombia we named national natural parks, and those are some areas that are protected for conservation, and also in relationship with the community, because you cannot like do close conservation and do not think on the community around it and their food sovereignty around also. And this allow also the health of the ecosystem, because it's cycle. So doing all of that made me want to like understand more about climate. Then I went to college to study like about how everything is connected. I always talk about the interconnectedness of every being, from the water to the mountains to the clouds, like how everything is so interconnected. And I went and studied environmental engineering at the Universidad Nacional de Colombia, where I did my university career and learned a lot more about the environment, but with a special emphasis in ecosystem, coastal ecosystem. And then I did my thesis around seagrass and how they help us capture carbon dioxide, and they're great allies for us in tackling climate change. So yeah, then from there my activism start really like with a more sturdy pace, talking about how climate change is going to affect us as island in the future, and how we must protect the ecosystems we have in our country. And I did part of the first lawsuit in Latin America around future generations and climate change. And we demand our government, our president, and a lot of the organizations that work towards the Amazon to make them protect the Amazon rainforest. And we won this lawsuit, and now Colombia has a special protection for the Amazon rainforest and the Amazon ecosystem. And it's very easy to find. You just write Colombia, future generations, Amazon trial, and you will find a lot of information about how kids and young people from around Colombia, different cities, how they come together to make this happen. Was a great success. And from there we have been working also in countering down the deforestation. And yeah, that's like where the activism starts, kind of. And yeah, and from there we have been working and advocating from my side, from around loss and damage, frontline communities, how it's important for indigenous peoples, local communities, women, children, youth, the Black diaspora, all should be included in the talk for our future, we must be on the table, talking about our future. We don't want to continue like other people taking determinations on our future. So yeah, that has been like a little around the activism that I have been doing, or like what I advocate for.
Thank you for sharing about your work so far and how you kind of started. So we'll talk about, I think, your current work in a moment. But just to start off with the Columbia Future Generations Amazon trial, can you talk a little bit about what the trial entailed? And then also, I suppose, how they actually protected the forest. So by what means the government could actually stop the deforestation.
Yeah, that this was an interesting trial. We were assessed by the NGO De Justicia, and we had to gather not only our testimonies as young people and children. We were 25 at the moment, participating in this lawsuit. And we had to share our experience, how we were experiencing climate change, and how this affect us and affect our capability of having a sustainable future or a livable future. And from there, we start arguing with our government, because in Colombia, we have one of the most advanced constitutions around nature, around human rights. Like, it's interesting because in the constitution we have a lot, and Colombia, we do that a lot. We have a lot of nice things on paper, but when we go for the really applying, it takes a lot more. But okay, we were these kids, like, full of hope, full of energy around the talk of climate change. This happened in 2018, when everything around climate change was just like starting to bubble up, like the climate crisis, when they start to call it a crisis. So we saw this moment as a like a pivotal moment to start talking about future generations, but also the conservation, the preservation of key ecosystems that will help us in the future fight this climate crisis. As the Amazon rainforest, we understand that the Amazon rainforest is one of the lungs of the earth. And why someone like me from an island would be advocating for the Amazon, it was related on our right of having livable environment, is the right we have for clean water, clean air, because we understand that everything is interconnected. And just like the Amazon rainforest produces the clouds that go through the Andes and rains in other parts of Colombia and generates the water they drink. We know, like, deforesting the Amazon rainforest is risking our life, is risking the life of many people. And in the most vulnerable side of it are the children, the elder people, women. So it was really interesting as young people and kids to understand this and address it to the government. We did a lot of campaigns. We had to get like information or statement from scientific papers. We had to get information and statement from organizations like the NOAA. A lot of things we had to get together just to go and present this to our government, like understanding the law, how it works, and how, in this case, we in Colombia named Acción de Tutela, how this mechanism that our government have for protecting the rights of the community, how we can use this to gain something that's is best for all of us. In this case, the protection of one of the most important our key ecosystems to fighting climate change, the Amazon rainforest. So yeah, this was something wasn't easy. We had like an entire year going to trials, going to sessions until the month of April, we get the great news that the court ruled in favor of us as of the kids and the youth. And like in additional to that, they granted the Amazon rainforest a special protection to stop deforestation, but also to preserve and help restore the ecosystem. And there it connects to the next question you asked around how we have been implementing this. In Colombia, it has been very interesting because this is something I'm gonna point out here. One of the greatest vulnerability of the climate crisis talk is that is also knotted to like political thoughts and like the government in the moment. So in Colombia, we change every 4 years from presidents. So it's very hard, like sometimes the president that's is in the moment, he's in favor of nature protection, but then the next in the other 4 years is not. So a lot of the things you've been advancing just like get cut or just disappears. And kind of that happened to us. We had this ruling with a president that was like very in conservation and restoration. And then the next year we were passed to a different president that was like everything oil, gas, do mining, a lot of crazy things.
Unfortunate.
Yeah, it's just like so dual sometimes, the things that happens around this talk about climate crisis and climate change. And in those last 4 years, we couldn't advance a lot in what was going on in around deforestation, but we could say from 2017 to 2018, the deforestation, it minored a lot, it went down with all the campaign we did, with all the help we had around our country to replicate what was going on, visiting the communities that were affected from the deforestation or had the most highest deforestation rate. So yeah, that was like how it's going right now. President Gustavo Petro is one of the most visionaries and most solid president we ever had around the protection of the environment, the recognition of the communities, the local communities, indigenous communities, the Afro-descendant communities in Colombia, and all the minorities. So also with the climate change movement, he's right now at the COP, and he has signed the fossil fuels treaty. Colombia now is one of the 10 countries that signed like the ban of use of fossil fuels. So we have a chance right now. We're back on the table talking about how we're going to tackle the deforestation in the Amazon, the resources that are available for doing all of the work with the community and helping to recover and restore the this very important and mega diverse ecosystem.
And so that's amazing to hear that now you have president supporting that. And those 4 years when you didn't have a president, or I suppose like an administration or general politics that didn't support climate action, are there any tools you used specifically to help still progress? Maybe not exactly on the Amazon part. But in other movements, are there tools you use to kind of work around that and still progress despite the politics?
That's a very interesting question. And as an activist, you always have like that little fire that you need to do something. You cannot like just keep your arms closed. So totally, we try to find ways to continue communicating what we were advocating for, the importance of the Amazon rainforest, also connected with other communities and other countries that also share the Amazon. Brazil is a very important holder of a lot of parts of the Amazon, or in percentage. But as communities and as indigenous peoples, we do not understand like frontiers. So it's just like this big home we have, and is the rainforest. And here in Colombia, we're doing something. In the Ecuador, they're also doing a lot of activism around the mining that's happening in the Amazon River. So all around this ecosystem and this biodiverse biome, it's doing like, we're very active in protecting this ecosystem. So we started from my side. I participated in a documentary that names De Providencia al Amazonas, from Providence to the Amazon. And I went there and I talked with the community, with the indigenous communities, also with the children. And we did this kind of documentary sharing about the importance of this trial, but also the importance of protecting the Amazon rainforest and how it connects everybody, and showing that someone from an island can also be a very active part of advocating for a different ecosystem. And that then we start talking the global language, because it's not only protecting your space, your territory, but understanding the importance of the other territories, of the other communities, understanding their vulnerabilities, understanding that this climate crisis is affecting everybody, but as minorities and as frontline communities, we are affected the most. And this mini documentary, it went out, it resonated a lot in climate movements. And then I was contacted by the Climate Action Network. They were carrying out this big campaign that named The World We Want, and it was about climate solutions, climate threats, climate disasters. And all these, this campaign was to leading up to COP 26.
Okay.
And that was very important. It was very important to showcasing what was happening in this little tiny part of the Caribbean, and how it was affecting our communities, in my case, the Raizal community. And from there, like taking the voice like of the local community, like in my local community, like feeling the urge to talk about what was going on in other spaces, and also understand the power of storytelling. That's another interesting tool that I used in that time, that we weren't working actively around the lawsuit. And also I had the opportunity to participate in other documentaries, but in series form, talking about the vulnerable ecosystems in Colombia, not only the Amazon or the coral reef in our case, but also the glaciers and the paramos that were suffering a lot due climate change. So it became a lot of storytelling about climate, about its effects, about solutions, and much more around the educating part of it. And these series were presented in the national channels, in the channels that the people of the community here in Colombia most watch. So it was like, and also family friendly. So it became like my way of speaking out when I didn't had the platform of the government, um, to side with us. So we start educating around what was happening in our country, and how, as young people, as kids, as a normal person in the home just watching a screen, how all of us can put a little um towards making the world a better place.
It's kind of what's the word? It's inspiring, I think, to hear that too, to see those documentaries. Just to get the name, the first documentary you made, it was called Providencia a las Amazonias.
Sí, desde Providencia hasta la Amazonía.
Okay.
El tiempo. El Tiempo is one of the major media press companies here in Colombia. So it has like national cover. So it got to be screened and talked about in like a lot of parts here in our country, in a lot of cities, and also in the communities. So it was nice to start the conversation rolling. And this also brings me this memory about when we started all of this movement. The young people weren't like doing this activism yet that we know now, because what we did, we started in 2017 and it took us to 2018, and in April we got the results of the ruling, um, and then the climate movement start to like resonate around the world in various opportunities. And also, that's when I went to COP25 to talk about what we did in Colombia. And I got the opportunity to meet with a lot of young people that were like trying to understand the climate movement, like how can we do more in our communities, and we start talk about how we can use the same tools the government puts for the community in our favor, and in the favor of nature and in the future generations. And a lot of things that have changed the nature rights, like a lot of things have came now in these days. So it's very nice to like feel that from something you participated in with your heart and you have been fighting for, like to see some of the sprouts or how it grown to other things. It's very, very yeah, heartwarming for me.
The impact of it
uh,
is amazing because it was only, that's crazy to imagine, it was only 5 years ago when, I mean, the entire movement started. Like before then, there were like kind of places like you sparked the overall movement. It's amazing to hear. I don't know exactly um any exact dates, but yeah, like all these activists online and climate protests and school strikes and all that only started a couple of years ago. So it's amazing to hear how organizations and documentaries like yours really inspired that entire movement to actually begin and get the word
yeah,
out
that
so
was
fast.
very interesting to see how it develops. Like and like I said, it's very heartwarming, like to be part of the climate movement, but like um feel the work and the tears and everything you put there, not only as a person but as a community. Understand all the other communities that have been vulnerated and had their livelihoods has been put on a hazard due to the fossil fuels industries, and these industries that are very debt driven, because
Yeah.
the only thing I could say is that, because how are you like auto sabotaging the planet you live on? Like how can you do that? So yeah, it's beautiful to understand and to feel the power also of our ancestors that put us here and put us with a very important um, task to protect our planet for the future generations like they did.
Yeah, that's fair. And I want to talk about more for sure your climate storytelling, because that sounds like your main mechanism of activism. Before that, real quickly, so I've learned about COP, and by the way, that's for anybody watching, just the Global Climate Summit. I think it stands for the Conference of Parties.
Yeah.
So it's the Global Climate Summit they have every year. This is the first one I've really watched, the COP 28, and it's nice to see how they are live streaming a good portion of it so you can see some of the things online. But I feel like there's still so much that most people don't know. As someone who's been to one virtually and two in person, is there any insights you can kind of tell us as to what really goes on at a COP and kind of what the goals are there?
Well, yeah. The main goal is to talk about the climate change, how it's affecting the health of the planet, but also is where the countries commit to lower their carbon dioxide emissions, and the process that causes the well all this crisis that's going on. So technically they go and sign on how much carbon they will lower this year or this a period of time. So some countries do not want to commit to lower their carbon dioxide because the consumism of the community of the population is part also of this crisis, because of there weren't a lot of consumers to such and such of products that are very oil based, then we won't have like these major problems. And it also ties with the economy. So you have countries that do not want to sign to lower carbon emissions, and then they find ways to avoid doing it or stuff like that. And you have other countries that are really affected by the climate change, and they're asking for compensation, they're asking for support, they're asking for financing for adaptation. And the other countries, yeah, that are part of how we will build the global solutions. So this is like my way of viewing what goes on COP. And then being there, you have the opportunity of connecting with a lot of communities, connect with a lot of people that are doing activism, that are advocating for the rights of nature. So you start to build alliances, you start to do collaboration, you start to do a lot of work together and strengthening the movement and strengthening the claims. And in the last 3 to 4 years, the COP has been like a space where they're including new voices, like the indigenous communities, the Afro diaspora, the youth, the women's, and other climate movements. And also it's giving space to climate's I could say it have given space to this climate movement to also flourish in a much higher level, because we've been doing activism on the ground and protests, and that has really helped to open the doors to go into the conversation. So when you are at COP, you have the opportunity also to be part of the conversation about, okay, what's our climate future? But it also has a side that I do not like a lot, because you have the people that are really taking the decisions at the end. Are several countries in closed rooms, and then they just come out and they will say like, oh, the US say they will commit to this, Canada say they will commit to that, we will create this fund for protection of nature and stuff like that. But then it's hard to access as local communities and local NGOs, or as communities that are really doing things on the ground for preserve the planet, for protecting ecosystems that are key to lowering the carbon dioxide emissions. Don't often see what
they promise.
money is doing, because it does not scale down, because we also have a lot of corruption and stuff like I was telling you before, like everything is so politically tied to finance, to government. So it's hard for the climate movement to have like solid grounds for change, but that is changing, and that's like makes me happy.
Okay.
In a sense, that we're getting this space to talk, this space to gain more visibility of our histories, but also of our vulnerabilities. So yeah, that is from my perspective, like what I understand, what I have experienced when I've been there. But like I shared before, this year the COP was being done in Dubai, in, like I said, one of the, like, Dubai is the impersonation of what fossil fuels can do, like create an entire city, and very yeah, it's morally interesting for me, and that's just like my point of view. So I didn't make it to Dubai, but I also have been very close to what's going on around how the um, um, loss and damage fund. That was something we were advocating a lot for last year, the loss and damage funds for the vulnerable communities, and to have the opportunity to participate in how the design of that fund is going to be. So this year we had in this COP finally the announcement of the commitment of the other countries on how they're gonna finance and give resources so the vulnerable communities can start working on adaptation and mitigation, on restoration also of ecosystems. So we hope in the participation of this process to really have the direct financing or mechanisms that helps the actual people that are doing things to access these funds so we can like do a much better work, but also continue to respecting and honoring the planet that has give us life.
And it seems like wasn't loss and damage discussed on the first day of COP?
Yeah, that was the first thing in this COP they talked about, and they finally revealed like the commitment in finance from the other countries into this fund. And now the important thing is to start talking about how it's going to be developed, how it's going to be or how it's going to get to the communities and the organizations that are really doing the work of protecting the planet, and like try to lower the bureaucratic system around the financing for climate.
And actually getting the money out there, because I know a couple of countries have pledged. It doesn't seem like anywhere near enough yet, so hopefully they give a lot more, but it seems like you're right. And because I know they've had discussions of loss and damage at previous COPs, not a ton of money came around. Are there actual legal systems that make a country pay, or is there any repercussion if a country doesn't pay? There's nothing. Okay.
No, that's like one of the interesting things that's happening. Last year, in the Pacific Islands, the students from the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, and their archipelago, they started this movement. They started before, but like it really come to strike like in the media around bringing to court the ruling of the ICGAO on climate change and the vulneration of the ecosystems, because we know that in the Pacific Islands, a lot of them are suffering from the rising of the sea levels. So a lot of people are losing their home. So we're talking about climate displacement, and no one is responsible for that. So they're in their claim, they're asking the International Court of Justice to give their ruling around climate change. So right now, it's not a compelling mechanism, but they did make the statement around how climate change is one of the hazards of our present, also for our future, and that the countries, they must commit to working towards lowering the temperature, but also if you commit to do something or funds and stuff like that, you should like comply, but is not like compelling legally, like, oh, you, if you don't pay, you will be sanctioned or something, or you will be punished. No, it doesn't exist, and I don't think it will work kind of in that way. Like compelling is important, like we get like under like a common ground, understanding who are polluting the most, because we cannot put the same weight on everybody, and every country have different economical systems, they have different challenges. We're here in the global south, we have our own challenges just within our society and our communities, but like we cannot also wear the burden of the climate crisis, because we know that we aren't like contributing to the destruction of the planet in that rate or in that area. So we really understand that yeah, it should have some kind of way to address who is doing what, and like have commitments on how we're going to work to solve or correct or mitigate what is going on related to climate.
Because you talk about like the Solomon Island students, that's amazing to hear, and how your island community, and you mentioned Ecuador, Brazil, Colombia is doing so much, and the global South. In terms of that, this might be a difficult question or something that maybe can't be answered, but so there are obviously a certain few countries that pollute the most, and there it seems like they're making technology, but most of the activism is coming from other areas who are most in harm's way. I suppose in that regard, is there any way to feel the same sense of urgency that people, for example, island communities who are probably the most vulnerable to this, is there any way to feel the same sense of urgency if you're living in a situation where maybe you have access to all of these even simple things, and I won't make any assumptions about anywhere, but even simple things like air conditioning somewhere, for example, if you have that, you don't feel extreme heat that much, and you maybe don't feel urgency. Is there a certain way to help people feel that kind of urgency and to help them feel like there really is something they should be doing to help everyone on the world?
I really like this question because there is where the activism that I do comes on front as a tool, as a way of communicating and also connecting with other people, other stories. Because storytelling or visual storytelling via documentary, a short film, those things can connect with people. Arts in connect with people from different backgrounds. So just having the opportunity of telling the story, of sharing what's going on, it's telling people and explaining people the urgency in a way they can digest it. Like it's not like someone protesting and like, oh, this is happening. It is you're seeing a movie, you're seeing a documentary about this island and this girl that's talking about protecting the ocean and protecting the Amazon rainforest, and like, and also um, it being capable to be digested by a lot of generations or ages, you know. So from the small kids can watch the movie, can relate with the documentary, also seeing a series on the beautiful ecosystems of Colombia, but also getting the chance to talk about their vulnerabilities, how it connects to climate change, talking with the indigenous communities and the local communities that are doing their work there and trying to protect the remain of those ecosystems and what are their needs for restoration. So all of that have give me a tool to connect with a lot of people from different backgrounds, from different ages, and yeah, just really the power of storytelling and honoring also our ancestors that leaves us with this way of sharing this story, because we're very oral people in our communities. Our histories pass from you know, from vibration to vibration. We weren't much to write on paper, so we learn to make stories, to teach, and also tell stories to preserve our culture. So I guess like that being handed to me gave me the opportunity to be in these spaces and creating these kind of content that also educate people, and it doesn't has any barriers, discrimination, or any sort of you know, thing that could block you from receive the what I'm sharing. So that have helped to soften some hearts
Yes.
around around the globe, and it has given me the chance to go in spaces and speak about it, also speak around storytelling, and now currently working in an organization that's also supports storytelling in local communities and with indigenous communities around the world. So I'm honored to now be working in a space where I can amplify even more what's going on in our communities, but also in other communities from other minorities around the globe.
I read a little about that too. It sounds like a fun organization. Before we get there, is would you say, because you talked about how people tell stories a lot better orally and through, you mentioned vibrations and being close, or is it more powerful then to make a movie and to tell stories person to person than to write a book usually?
In this time, or in this era,
Yeah,
in, in the now that we live in, we are very visual humans right now, in the sense that we want to see the form, we want to hear the sound, we want to see the colors, because I could talk to you or I could read to you about the beautiful island of Providencia, and talked about the Sea of the Seven Colors and a lot of the histories around the island, and it's beautiful and you could picture it in your head. But the experience is totally different when I take the camera and I show you all those blues and greens and those hills, and hearing the sounds of the birds and what they actually sound and look like, how the people, you know. So I, in this moment, I can say is one of the most powerful tools we have for
it sounds
storytelling.
it sounds immersive. It's tempting me to come there. Um, yeah, I love that though. Like documentaries and even videos like this or something. It seems so
Mhm.
powerful. Well, I had one last question. Well, two last. But before we wrap up, one, you actually mentioned this in the very beginning, but I was kind of curious. It's been on my mind for a while, and I think it might hopefully help anybody watching. You talked about indigenous knowledge and specifically knowing weather patterns from, for example, if you see clouds in the sky, or even, I'm not sure you mentioned, but if you feel like the soil or something, I have no experience with that. Can you describe exactly how that works, how you kind of predict the weather and what that knowledge is kind of like for you?
Yeah, like, is not like predict the weather, is like you live so entangled with the nature, you start to understand their patterns and the cycles of how everything works, and also with the knowledge gathered by your ancestors that have lived in that territory. They so they gives you like this toolkit, like, okay, this is the basic, this is what we know. You guys continue understanding better and see what's changing, like my generation, like what we're seeing changing. But like, for example, like in the islands, we understand when the storm weather is coming, like it's something like so accurate. Like when you feel the temperature of the water, we have a like, as islanders, Raizal people in our island, we have a notion of the temperature of the water, like the average temperature. So you can know by hand, like when it's cooler or when it's hotter. So when you feel the water, the hot water, the sea and the beach, you feel the temperature of the water, you could say, oh, a storm is coming, because the water is warmer. It's not, some people will say, no, it's cooler because the breeze and the rain that's coming. But before
Yeah.
a storm, the water is warm. It's just like, so you learn like, oh, and you understand like, oh, right now the corals are suffering there because it's so hot. You just like feel with your hand, and you know like this is not a good temperature for the coral reef biodiversity. It's really hot. Like these days, some scuba divers from our island, they were like showing, we had like this crazy week of warm water, and everyone was like, oh, we went into water and it was warm, and then we started looking at the corals, and then we noted that some of the patches of the coral were going blank because the temperature of the water was really high. And like, looking at the clouds, when our island, normally the sky is very blue, you can see the blue from like you wake up. um so when the clouds start like gathering, or you start to see the wind rises, the yeah, a lot of little things start happening that indicates that it's going to rain, or a storm is coming near. But also when you see the phases of the moon, and you know like, okay, when it's growing, you can plant this type of fruit, or you shouldn't plant this other type of um, plant because it doesn't want to grow, because it's connected with the forces of attraction that the moon does to the earth and the sea level, and all of that. So it's very interesting. I cannot like, I will have to show you and be there, and like, yeah, like to the full experience of what's living in a territory, in a community, in a very natural, pristine ecosystem, how you can feel things differently. Also, like my friends in the Amazon, like in Ecuador, in Sarayaku, and other regions. I have friends there from indigenous communities, and is they live in such a harmony with the forest and the river. You see the monkeys, and they will come and fetch food from the trees around. And they live just like, oh, they're part of the nature. They aren't scared of humans, not because they're domesticated or anything like that. It's just that everyone is just cohabitating, you know? So it's just beautiful. And that's why we have the like indigenous and local communities activists. We have this like urge for the others to understand and feel what we feel, because we're talking about home, we're talking about the planet we share with others, and with those others that cannot even talk or cannot like defend themselves. So we feel that urge to speak up, go up to the front, and make our voices being heard. So yeah, that's that's a very interesting question.
I appreciate that, and I love the answer too, because it seems I can relate with what you're saying a little bit. I don't understand exactly all the methods you use because again, I don't live there, but it's amazing to hear. And I think that probably speaks so much to what you were saying on why we should include everyone, is because when we include people from everywhere, we get this understanding that's so much bigger. I've read, I think, maybe 2 or 3 articles, briefly, that's like a meteorologist goes to some island community and they predict the weather, but then all the locals know the weather better than them, and they say it's going to storm tomorrow. It doesn't, or something like that, right? Stories. but it seems so much more helpful to just talk with someone about it. So I think that is kind of a testament to how powerful it is for everyone to really work together in the climate movement, which you've talked so much about. So I think that's really helpful, and it definitely brings some insight. Thank you. And one final question. So this might be a little more challenging. So if you want a moment to think, feel free because you have so much knowledge in the climate area. If there is one piece of advice you could give to someone who is looking to work in the climate area, whether that be in conservation, renewable energy, anything like that, if there's one piece of advice, what would you say to help them become motivated and start working in the climate area?
Mm, that's an interesting question. And from my side, what I can say or what I will tell anyone that starting in the or wanting to contribute to this climate movement and understand maybe how to tackle this climate crisis is to always, always, always understand that this is the only planet we have. Like understand that this is the only planet we have, and we we can do better because the solutions are there. Support the local communities, support indigenous communities that have for hundreds of years lived in harmony and in in cohabitation with the nature. We have solutions. So if someone wants to be here also, just come as a supporter of the communities, but also understand that this is the only planet we have, and we can and we must do better. So if I can do my part, I I am sure if I do and someone else in some other part of the world also do their part, we're we're fighting, we're doing something, we're getting there because the change is really, really near. And that is what a lot of people and our ancestors have been fighting for all these years, having a space to do the changes and be the changes we want to see. And also understand that this is the only way we can come together as planet, as communities, as people, as brothers, as sisters, and fight for our home.
I think that helps. We're all kind of one big family. So, and I think your storytelling really helps to unite us. Unite us, yeah. When we all share our stories together and learn about each other, it helps to unite us kind of in the whole mission to make the world better. And like you said, to implement the solutions that already exist. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, Yurshel. Um, I know you're very busy, so I appreciate your time speaking with me for an hour. And I hope that everybody viewing this will get something out of it. I certainly learned a lot. I love the different perspectives I gained with your knowledge, and also kind of some of the insights into things like COP and those broader things, but then also more personal things in your life. And then predominantly storytelling. I love storytelling. I am new to it, but it definitely helps having someone like you to help kind of educate. So thank you very much.
No, thank you, Giovanni, for inviting me, for also opening opportunities for these different perspectives, these different point of views, and also bringing these parts of the world to the ears and the eyes of other people to understand that we are all interconnected, we're all coexisting in this planet, and yeah, and the future is for all of us. So yeah, we must fight for a better one.
Thank you so much, Yurshel.
Thank you.